Item D on the agenda, new and previous matters. Item 2, discussion related to parking regulations and snow events. I don't know who is taking the lead on this.
I will, President Lysak. I want to thank everyone for coming together tonight to discuss this. Dana and I have been working diligently, probably for the past 5 months, on taking a look at our current parking ordinances. That was to include our snow operations, basically a real good look at what we thought was going to be a simple fix to a few things. But as we kind of got into the weeds of things, we thought it would be a good idea to get together and discuss this as a committee of the whole, that we can address all needs of the city. As you can see from Chief Mitchell, we all received an email basically with an overview of most of the research that we did over the past 5 months. And initially, I thought maybe there was some singular issues, but as I looked at it, it seems that we need to have a more comprehensive approach on this. So I guess we can take a look at a few items that was of concern was enforcement. I wanted to see if we had the resources that we needed, especially during plow operations. My opinion, and I don't know if others will agree with this, is I think that with the growth of our city, per Peter Daniels, said that I think we grew by 2,000 vehicles in 2 years. With the developments that we have increasingly larger amount of vehicles on the street, and I think enforcement is a real issue. And taking more of a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach. And by that I mean when we get into the guts of our snow operations, we have a problem. We have a problem with enforcement as far as removing vehicles. I don't think that our forfeiture scale really fit that the message is getting across that we're having the issues that we're having in the city. And ultimately, it made sense to look at the municipal code. So I thank Attorney Decker on this for helping Dana and I and everyone else who has really taken time to put together this data for us. So I don't know where we want to go with this, but we're open for questions.
I think probably the best way to proceed is if Attorney Decker could give us a brief overview of the proposed new ordinance. I see there's a lot of changes in the ordinance from what we currently have, and if you could briefly let us know what those changes are and how this will affect parking especially during the winter months.
Yes, sir. So the changes that were proposed, first, this is a discussion item, so there's actually no ordinance that's going to be passed tonight, which is to the committee's benefit, because if there are any changes that you want to suggest to the authors, we could just make those changes tonight without any formal motions or anything like that. The ordinance will have to be presented on a later date and noticed as such, so that flexibility is good for tonight if there's any interest in doing so. A few of the changes that were made within this draft ordinance were just to clean up the language. So there are some things you'll see that were erased and says reserved, or erased and references a state law. A lot of it is because it just repeated state law that was already adopted. So those items don't change anything substantively. I'm going to focus on a few of these substantive changes instead. You'll see the table of forfeitures on there. Everything in green is brand new. It replaces the old table. And you're going to see a lot of changes in that it's a little smaller, it's a little shorter. And that's because the other table, the old one, the one that currently exists, has a lot of references to state law that are repetitive. And the ranges were sometimes either accurate or inaccurate with state law. And so what I did here is we went through and went with the table, pulling from state law all the exact forfeiture amounts, referencing the specific state laws, not just our code, under which the law is created, and then also referencing the certain sections of our code that we created just for the city, and what those forfeiture ranges are as well. So if you look at that, if there's any interest in making changes to those amounts, please let me know, because there are state laws that sometimes restrict how much the city can charge. We are required to be consistent with state law for state traffic violations. So anytime you see WISSTAT something, there's usually going to, or there always is, a forfeiture amount associated with that as far as a maximum amount, and that is the maximum amount the city can charge as well. And then, if you go past that table, section 3, you'll see that was just a change to make sure that we're adopting state law. Section 4 is the next substantive part, which the council has a lot of discretion to create a regulation like this. This is the snow emergency regulations part of it. So, what I did in this version was in consulting with Alderperson Keene and Grisham, we created a ordinance that still says 3 inches accumulation can trigger a snow emergency. That was consistent with the past. You see that I added a few ways in which they can be publicized, including direct text messaging, internet use, and anything else the director deems appropriate to accommodate future technological and communicative advantages or changes. The next big one you'll see is under B, so it's 10.111B, this very bottom paragraph on page 6. That paragraph in green basically changes the way that we define snow emergencies. Under state law, the city is allowed to define the snow emergency in any way that it deems reasonable. And so right now, what our Director of Public Works does is he tries to determine when it's going to start snowing and when it's going to stop snowing. And he declares that moment as the snow emergency. The issue is, as we know, the plowing operations will take a little time past that, though. And so if folks are parking their cars on the streets after that ends, then it really interferes with the ability to clear the street. So what this new version does is it actually extends the definition of snow emergency to whenever the director declares an emergency, that's 3 inches of accumulation, having to give the public a 1-hour heads-up notice. But then rather than having it end at a certain time the director picks, it's going to always end at 3 p.m. on some day. And the purpose is to make it easy for the public to understand when a snow emergency ends. We want to make sure it's something consistent, like it's always 3 p.m. So everyone's going to know 3 p.m. is when it ends. The question is which day. And the director will pick that day when he declares the snow emergency. So the purpose of it is for him to declare it at least 2, maybe even 3 days after it stops snowing, to ensure that cars will switch sides of the street and allow the plow operations that take place in the early morning hours to clear both sides of the street. So how that would work in practice. If it's an even day, like let's say it's the 16th, if that's when the snow emergency is declared, it starts at 10 p.m. that night. Let's assume that's what's going to happen. Cars have to park on the even side of the street that night. That would allow the plow operations to take over the odd side of the street from that day or that moment until 3 p.m. of the following day. Then it's the 17th at 3 p.m. Cars can park anywhere they want between 3 p.m. and 10 p.m. But by 10 p.m. on the 17th, you got to be on the odd side of the street now. That will allow plow operations to take care of the even side of the street from 10 p.m. until 3 p.m. the next day. And then, depending on the timing of how this works, once the director has figured this out, he would declare the end of the snow emergency to be the 18th. So 3 p.m. on the 18th, it would end. It would have started at 10 p.m. on the 17th, or however he wants to work that out, that giving him 2 full nights of plowing operations, and including the daytime, including the morning. So the idea would be to take advantage also of that time, because as we've known, the plow or the towing contractor that the city currently has is at its busiest, like every other towing contractor, during the snowfall. Those 2 days afterwards, though, they shouldn't be as busy. And so that actually improves the ability for our contractor to respond to calls for service, because they won't be scrambling like every other tow company in the 7-county area to pull cars out of ditches while it's actively snowing. So it's a good way, to, I think, to create a firm rule, like a 3 o'clock expiration time. It's clear and easier to communicate. It also frees up some resources for towing in the future. And it also creates a situation where DPW is actually able to use the snow emergency rules to clear both sides of the street and do so without having to work around cars that are legally parked on opposite sides of the street. So that's probably the biggest change proposed within this ordinance. Yeah, so those are the major things that I present to you tonight with this type of amendment. So if there's any discussion on it, I'm happy to hear it.
Mr. President,
Woman Keene.
2 items just to add, you might notice in some of the fees that the first fee might have been lowered from what it originally was. The reason why, again, since Cale had stated, that is to be within state statute. Within some of these, by lowering the initial fee, it did allow us to increase the second offense fee. So that way, someone might just be having a bad day, might have forgot sick, didn't move their car. We really want to focus on the offenders that continually not do it. So by lowering the first, well, okay, you didn't do it. It's the second fee then that we were able to increase then the higher amount, so that we're actually holding the repeat offenders a little bit more obligated. And then to the point with switching sides, our thought process behind it was, to Cale's point, that it does give, hopefully, even if you leave at 8 a.m., again, it's an even side, so 10 p.m. to 3 p.m. the next day, you leave at 8, you're reparking your car back on the even side of the street. So that way, if the plow operations did not get to your block, we're hoping that what it does, now we're gonna have offenders, is leave one side more open. So you leave, you go back and you park on the even side until 3 p.m. Then then from 3 to 10, people getting off of school, groceries, out of work, items like that, then you can park on either side. Then by 10 p.m. that night, if it's an odd day, you have to then be on the odd side until 3 p.m. the following day again. So then hopefully then that even side should be all opened up and make it easier for plow operations.
Mr. President, I have, just to add to what Alderwoman Keene said, one good example here will be the change that was made to snow emergency parking violation. You can see that is WAMC 10.11, snow emergency for $40. Subsequent successive days, they'll get a $100 citation. And one of the motivations I looked at, or deterrents, I should say, that would motivate those that are more habitual offenders is to hit the pocketbook a little harder. And I think we're going to see that with these changes. To speak to another note, did a lot of work on this, and something as simple as saying, well, you know what, why can't we just get everybody to park on one side? Cale gave me a real good lesson in the law and how that works, and also understanding that we'd need signage, for example. So when we come forward and we say, well, we can just get people to park on one side of the street, we can't define a snow emergency as a snow event, because if we put it as a snow event, 3 inches or more, we have to put signage throughout the entire city, which then is going to cost the taxpayers $500,000. We have, I think, Peter said 92 miles between, of signage that we'd have to put out, and that's not affordable. So we're trying to find that window that we can still work within under a declaration of snow emergency. My only concern with the declaration of snow emergency is we'll have the efficiencies with the plow operation for residential streets, but even I, as a business owner, how will that impact me on major thoroughfares? Because it's the same, there's rules for the major thoroughfares too. So we really have to look at that consideration. But I think last winter was really a great example to really take a look at how plow operations work. Not every year are we looking at that amount of snow, but still, it was a real big problem. It cost the city a lot of money in overtime to go replow these streets, and we just have to button this up and really look at what is going to be more efficient going forward.
City Council Member Alderman Stefanski.
I think one of our biggest things too is we need to make sure, and Dave and I talked about this, the plow drivers need to plow closer to the curb. I can give you an example. Every year, I can go out after we have a big snowstorm in front of my house, and I can lay the length of my shovel down from the curb to the end of the snow plowing, and that whole length of that shovel is how far out we are from the curb. So I know we have to work with Department of Public Works on that too, and I think that would help a lot if we can get closer to the curb when we're plowing to curb some of this problem that we have with parking.
Just as a point of information, Alderman Stefanski, I know exactly what you're saying, and I had the same problem. However, there are people that have a very short distance between the sidewalk and the curb, and when a plow goes too close to the curb, it blows all the snow back over onto their sidewalk and creates a whole nother issue.
Yep.
So, plow operators have a fine line to walk.
Well, and that
It's
has a
not an
lot-
easy job.
That has a lot to do with speed as well, because
Yes,
I've
that-
seen it happen on like 84th Street when I've watched it,
Yep.
and they're
It goes
shooting on
right
the
back
sidewalk.
onto the sidewalk.
Yeah.
So it's,
Well, if I
it's a
may
tough
add, I
job.
was in the plow truck and we were going very slow and you could
Yeah.
see it all tunnel over anyhow, so.
It is a tough job, there's no
it's a tough
question
job.
about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments on the proposed parking ordinance?
One other question. How many times can a person get ticketed in a 24-hour period?
So the way it's worded right now is once a day. So just calendar days, 24-hour period, once every 24 hours,
Okay.
effectively.
President Lysick, may I add to that, just to, for those of you who are not aware, there was also a change in the ordinances prior to about habitual offenders. And this is kind of a communications piece that I'd like to follow up with our West Dallas PD and the parking enforcement, that they're taking a look at, if their parking enforcement officers are seeing these cars parked there subsequent days, that they cross-run that license plate, because if they fit a certain criteria, and maybe Cale can break that down for you, that can call for an immediate tow. Whereas before we had that window, we have to wait those 72 hours, and that keeps that car on the road. If you could, just kind of meet that criteria, if they haven't paid the fine, if they have outstanding balances. Go ahead.
Sure, Mr. President. The change that was made was a few months ago, and it actually is the only state law that allows you to tow a vehicle that is legally parked. And it's because if someone has 5 or more unpaid citations that they haven't paid for 60 days, then that makes that car eligible to be towed, even if it's legally parked. So, again, there are protections in place for folks, so that no one should be accidentally in that situation, but that is yet another tool that could be applied in this world.
Mr. President, I got one more question. Anything in here, does anything in here help with business owners who work out of their home and have multiple vehicles taking up an entire street, basically?
That issue is not addressed. This ordinance does not look at who owns the vehicles.
Okay, because I know one in my district who has 5 vehicles with salters and plows on the front of these trucks and takes up the entire city block almost, and doesn't make it available for residents to park, and he doesn't seem to care.
I'm aware of that issue. Alderman Weigel has spoken about that in the past too.
Yeah.
So I know that's an issue.
Is that something that we can address maybe with this whole thing, or is that a separate one?
Maybe you can work with Attorney Decker
It-
on this before the ordinance is introduced and see if that could be added.
Okay.
Chief Mitchell?
So I just want to give a little background as you contemplate changes to the ordinance. If you go to a 10 PM standard, that would be something, we typically issue a ton of parking tickets when the city is not busy. Those hours are typically going to be between 3 AM and 6 AM. So if you started at 10 PM, which is fine, we'll find a way to do it. Just understand that the second shift officers, that's a very busy time period for them. We always, as a department, make it a huge priority during snow emergencies to try and clear the streets, as is witnessed from the large number of tickets that we wrote during the emergencies this year. So just be aware, if you started at 10 PM, there would not necessarily be this strong enforcement right at 10 PM. Off the top of my head, the only way that we could do that would perhaps bring people in on overtime and dedicate to them, to that project, which we could certainly do. Another thing that we would likely have to have conversation about, if you are looking at reducing the fine amount for the first offense, and you believe that you will make it up by enforcement for people with the second offense, just understand that how we issue tickets, we don't always necessarily know what the second offense is. The only way to do that is to run each and every plate before you issue the ticket. Now, there is certainly some technology that we could explore. We recently implemented a handheld ticket dispenser that is tied in to the night parking permit when we eventually get there. We have a long ways to go on that program. But your average person writing a ticket during a snow emergency is not necessarily a parking control officer. It's going to be a uniformed police officer. So for sake of argument, if we go from 440 tickets issued in a 36-hour time period on the first snow emergency, and you now make it, instead of looking at the car, determining that there is a violation, quickly issuing a ticket, and moving on to the next, if you now are running all of those, just understand that that 440 will be something far less than 440. If that makes sense?
Yeah.
To find out the ones that would truly be a second or subsequent. So I think the real answer is technology. So I would caution you, do what you want, and we'll work with that, and we'll help you get there. Perhaps a long-range goal would be, in my mind, a reduced violation amount for the first offense and a larger for the second. But for me, to get there, you would want this technology piece so that you would know immediately. And just understand the system that we bought is enough to equip the Jeep checkers when they're out doing their job. And I believe we have one extra unit that a police officer can check out. So even if technology catches up, unless we bought more of that technology, everyone else would be running it and hoping that, you know, they were getting the previous number of parking tickets. So just something to consider.
I have a, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I have a question for Chief Mitchell. So you bring up that we only have a few vehicles that have that capability. Is there an opportunity to buy a enterprise license which would cover as many licenses that we have in the department?
We can do an analysis on that. The problem you get, when we bought the units that we have, we did not buy them for everyone because we realized that writing parking tickets is not the primary function of everyone.
Right.
So to save money, we bought just enough that we think we could give an officer to go along with the parking checkers.
Okay.
We could certainly analyze that. Another thing to look at, and I'm not saying don't do the 10 p.m. thing, because one thing that we should never forget, if you do the 10 p.m. start, just voluntary compliance alone might improve the ability for DPW to plow the streets. So let's say we get our voluntary compliance up to a higher percentage. That's going to help right there before we ever issue a single ticket on the back end. So I think it is a good idea. Just understand the, you know, the limitations that we'll have in doing it.
And then my second question is, I know you've got a rec out there for a new parking checker.
Yes.
Could that person's hours then maybe fluctuate to cover the time when the police officers are most busy at that 10 o'clock start time?
But then we would lose it on the back end. So their hours right now, we have two that work night shift. They start at 10:30 p.m. and then they get off at 6:30. It's 6:30 in the morning. Or I screwed that up. They're 2:30 to 10:30. They start at 2:30 in the morning and they get off at 10:30 in the morning. So a 2:30 start time gets them in 1/2 hour before the no parking time period from 3 a.m. until 6 a.m. And that is their peak period of busyness. So if we started them earlier at 9:30 at night, you're going to lose it on the back end. So I don't think
No,
it's going
I'm
to be.
just saying one of them, because we'll have three now, right?
Yeah, but you still, they are very productive. They write tickets throughout their entire shift. And it's not going to make them any more productive to do it at 10 o'clock. We could certainly explore during a snow emergency, does one of them come in earlier and one come in later? But I don't know that it's going to be a net gain whether they're doing it at 10 o'clock at night or at 3 o'clock in the morning, we could surmise they're going to write the same number of tickets in a shift, no matter what time period they're actually doing it during. And the third checker is very busy throughout the day. She is a day shift checker, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday. You'll see her in the downtown area a lot, dealing with impacted parking and areas down here. Handicap parking all throughout the city is another big one, fire hydrant complaints that we get. So I would say they'd be as productive no matter what hours of the day they're doing it.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, just to touch on that, I do definitely understand the 10 PM. You know, there's a lot more happening than someone parked on the wrong side of the road. And really, not to speak for Alderwoman Grisham, but our hope was to have a little bit more voluntary compliance with it. And we see how it goes, you know. Maybe next year when we see snow removals or things aren't working, we can readjust. And then to speak on the fees, any ones that were lowered, it was also to ensure that everything's within compliance and good to go. So just 2 points I wanted to make mention.
And
Mr.
we had,
President.
for sake of argument, I think the second snow emergency was 53 hours this year. The first one was 36 hours. They were over a period of 5 days. So if we brought in 2 officers on overtime for 5 days for 3 hours each officer, you're not talking large dollar amounts. It's not something that's going to cripple the city.
Mr. President, I have a few follow-ups. One, the 10 PM, you know, I'm looking at, do we have three parking enforcement?
Yes,
Okay,
but 2
so-
at night and 1 during the day.
Okay, are we adding another?
No, we had a person notify us of her retirement, so she's
Okay.
leaving in,
Okay, so we're still
Early
going to be
May.
at 3.
yes.
And one of the questions that I had for you in my plethora of questions was how do you feel about our ability to enforce? Because looking at this even as a short-term goal or a long-term goal, this was part of the reason that I asked everybody to come together. Maybe we need to look at a parking enforcement division somewhere going forward.
Yep.
Because what I'm seeing is it's sort of like when you reprimand a kid. If you're only going to do it on the weekends, they're going to get away with murder during the week. And that might not be a great analogy, but I think the consistent enforcement is what we need in the city, because it's like a runaway train right now. And what ends up happening then when we have snow events or snow emergencies, we're being reactive and we're trying to catch up. But to speak back to your point about that habitual offenders ordinance or amendment, there was a reason we put it there. So if we can't count on enforcement to be able to cross-check it, it's no more worth the words on the paper. But I do understand where you're coming from.
Yep.
When you say, okay, we need the software. So these are the reasons I'm bringing everybody together, or we're bringing everybody together, is so we can have more maybe of a comprehensive plan going forward. This isn't going to get solved overnight, but we were looking at the most simplistic things that we can do now to make those changes. So that 10 PM, maybe you can stagger those 3 and bring them in earlier and change those hours. You know, what do they do from that 6 a.m. to 10:30? Is that follow up on all the citations, or?
Yeah, they're
2:30
much
to
like
10.
a police officer. Any ticket that a police officer issues, they have follow-up paperwork that they have to do at the end of their shift. They have to get that ticket into the system. A number of administrative tasks that they have to do. So if you think, you know, your average police officer might not issue a ticket in a shift, or they might issue 5 tickets, they might issue 10. Parking checkers are going to issue a ton of tickets every shift. So at the end of every shift, they have a lot of administrative work to do to get those tickets into the system and get them on their way to getting paid.
And- I'm
Oh,
sorry,
go
can I
ahead.
follow up on that? So if we had more software, or we looked at more software in the future, we could probably mitigate that and make it more efficient.
And that is possible with the checkers that we currently have. Again, we're not there yet, but one of our goals is that a parking permit from the time it's created, from the time you go online or in person, you buy a parking permit, it's in a software system. That system does not communicate with many other systems or any other systems. So a long-range goal that we have with these systems that we bought to issue tickets on the street is that the parking permit system will communicate with that, making it easier. So in like a dream world, which maybe we can get to within a year or so, a parking checker would drive down the street. They would have automated license plate reader. Actually, this will take longer than a year to get to. The reader would tell them as they're driving down the street, that car right there doesn't have a permit. It would essentially make their job easier and alert them. That is some of the long-range planning that we have been doing to be more efficient in parking. So yeah, we're definitely open to that. It's just getting there.
Mr. President.
Alderman Stefanski.
Okay, so being an IT guy myself, the software that you said doesn't talk to this one, do you need or have a developer, a software developer that can create that, or is that done by the city here?
It's being done now. The company that sells the handheld device is working on that right now. That's one of the things that they say they can do, is they can take existing databases and get it into their system.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know how, you probably don't know how far along that is. Yeah, it's definitely, we're working on it.
Okay, and then my one other thing is, just real quick, I noticed we've got a fee for motor running while parked. Now, I know we have, as the vehicles are progressing, many people have remote starts. I know I have one, my
Yep.
wife has one in her vehicle. Are these cars, if they're sitting on our driveway or in our front of our house, are they gonna get ticketed for warming them up in the wintertime?
So I would suspect that might be an area of the ordinance that you might wish to amend. I believe that common sense police officers would know the difference. So the intent of the ordinance is that you not put a physical key in the car and walk away so that anyone can steal your car. That's the intent.
Right.
I'd be shocked if we have police officers that don't understand that intent and that are issuing tickets for people with that remote start, where when you get in the car, if you try and put it in park, the car dies and it's dead.
Right.
So perhaps the ordinance needs to catch up with technology, but until you amend that ordinance, we do have police officers that give the ticket for physical key being in the car,
Which it
but we
should
don't
be.
have police officers giving tickets for a remote start.
That they should be giving keys for when they're in the car, absolutely.
Yep.
Mr. President, just to follow up on that, Tracy, I think as somebody has a remote start, you have maybe a 10-minute warm-up and then your car
Yeah.
kills. So I think the officers would be able to determine if a car was running for, until it's running out of gas. So I don't know that we really actually need to amend it. I mean, that's common sense, like you said, from the
Yep.
officer's deduction when they see a vehicle. But Gail, if you'd like to weigh in.
Mr.
No.
Booker.
That's a separate issue.
Okay, all right.
Mr. President, I can say my last words, if I could.
I don't know about the last words, but you can have some words.
But anyway, Chief, initially, my thought was because on the east end, between the first and second shift, every time we have a storm, it's all a lot of confusions, because a lot of people, of course, they're like to violate. They think, well, I'm not gonna move my cars. So my the initial proposal that I proposed in the resolution about changing the parking, I do understand that it's a costly involved by changing all the municipal signage throughout the city, it's not an easy solution, but I like the idea of some of the changes Alderperson Keene and Christian came around with. I like the idea. Can you maybe address the fact how Milwaukee really, they have a 2 a.m. parking regulation, 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., right? So how it really works for Milwaukee? Is it more effective?
So I
I don't know, it's hard one.
No, I'm actually happy you asked the question. If you drive through the average city of Milwaukee neighborhood and compare it to the average West Dallas neighborhood, you will see that our streets are plowed better. Every urban environment during a snow emergency is going to have issues keeping up. It's always in our best interest to find new ways to keep up. But I would welcome anyone to compare the city of Milwaukee to the city of West Dallas when it comes to what do the streets look like, how good do the DPW drivers plow, how effective do the police enforce, how quickly and efficiently do they tow cars. I welcome that comparison any day.
Thank you.
There basically is no comparison.
Attorney Decker?
Just for the council's benefit too, I believe in drafting this, we acknowledge the idea that the machines that the police department uses right now are not able to necessarily check whether someone's been convicted or charged in a prior date. So the way it's worded in this version is your second snow emergency violation of $100 would occur if it's on a successive day. So hopefully the checker would come by, see the vehicle, see there was already a ticket on the vehicle, and then issue the $100 ticket at that time. So there wouldn't be a need at that point to backtrack those records. That can be changed to just second offense within a 12-month period, because the statutes allow up $100 for a second offense within a 12-month period. But it was worded in a way to hopefully be helpful for the police department in those situations where someone's parked, they've blocked at that time, and the next day they come through and they are still blocking the same area. So that would be just a way to accommodate that for now. And if there's an interest in changing that to just simply a second conviction in a 12-month period, the council could do that too.
Any other comments or questions?
I have one more. That would be, I didn't speak to what you were saying about the difficulty of the parking checker, but that's really, like, even if there was a handful during a snowstorm that an officer is seeing, okay, they have not moved. You have the same constituent or resident calling in saying, hey, I've seen this car here for a week now. Those are instances that I'm speaking of. I wouldn't expect that you're able to cross-reference every license plate. However,
Yep.
something that would be,
A
know,
They,
yeah, kind of a
they
no-brainer.
still would have to, now some people go and grab the ticket off the car and then they don't move the car. We still would have to, if I'm correct, in the new ordinance, verify that a first ticket had been issued. Yeah, which that's no problem for us.
Okay, thank you.
If there's tickets piled up on the car, that's easy to do.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, you'd be able to tell if a car didn't move with a big snowbank 3 feet around it, so,
Pretty
you
much
know,
buried.
hopefully then
And
it should eliminate not having to pull up every license plate, but, you know, when it looks like they're parked on an iceberg, then,
Yep, and that is a big share of what we do in the days after a snow emergency and during a snow emergency. We've always prioritized quote-unquote snowbirds, and that is where the late shift and the day shift, so day shift at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m. before it's busy, it's low-hanging fruit. They see a car that clearly has snow all over it, you know it. You'll see in our police reports still document, per the National Weather Service, the last documented snowfall was on February 21st at 3:17 p.m. I inspected the car on February 23rd at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That is greater than 24 hours, so I know it didn't move. They get very detailed in the tickets that they issue. So, yep, we definitely do that, and we will continue to.
Are there any more comments or questions? If not, I assume the ordinance will be introduced for the next council meeting?
If Alderpersons Grisham or Keene want to introduce it, then that would be what would happen. If there's any changes that they want to make between now and then, we could do that as well.
Right. And if any of the elder persons have any changes they want to make, just contact Attorney Decker. And I want to thank Alderwomen Keene and Grisham for their work on this. Did a nice job. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Moving on to the next item for discussion regarding the current and future status of the city towing contract with NNS Towing. Do we want to go into closed session for this? I assume we do.
I make a motion to go in closed session.
I got to read the, For agenda item 3, the committee may convene in closed session pursuant to the provisions of section 19.85, parent E of the state statutes for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. The committee may reconvene in open session after completion of the closed session and consider the balance of its agenda. Is there a motion then?
I make the motion, yes, to go into closed
Second.
session.
And seconded. Alderman Vitale?
Aye.
Alderman Tenorio?
Aye.
Alderman Stefanski?
Aye.
Alderwoman Grisham?
Aye.
Alderwoman Keene?
Aye.
Alderman Rote?
Aye.
Alderman Haas?
Aye.
Alderwoman Reinke?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. We will be going into closed session now.